Philosophically, I am completely with Commissioner Howard. I do have some concerns about how we do it, and so I've created a little presentation with some help from Commissioner Frazier called Breaking Up is Hard to Do. I think that was a Neil Sedaka song, was it? Because breaking up is hard to do, because this contract was written in such a way that it made breaking up hard to do. There are problems with this. So I'm going to step through this and explain the issues. I think we need to bring some issues to light so you understand why this board is going to do whatever it does and what the salient issues are. Next slide. So the real question here is from my perspective, assuming we agree to leave, assuming we agree, and I want to be careful not to use any other word beyond that because I don't want to incur a financial liability prematurely. The question is, how do we leave? Leaving now will cost us $3 million, which is about $50 per family. And if this project, of course, dissolves on its own, we would walk away for free, most likely. Next slide. The impact of leaving now, well, this is, as I said, $3 million to Carroll County taxpayers. Another benefit is it's over, it's done, and there is not really much of a cost avoidance, though. We might incur a couple $100,000 more, but for the most part, we're capped at approximately a $3 million liability, whether we leave now or whether we leave several months from now. The impact of waiting. If the project dissolves, we walk away. We save the $3 million. There is little or no exposure to additional costs. The likelihood of finding a replacement partner, well, maybe. But that's where we were a year ago, maybe. Next slide. Question, if we wait, is there any reason to believe the project is likely to dissolve? Well, yes, there are actually 6 reasons that I believe the project may dissolve on its own if we wait. Number 1, permitting challenges. Over 2,000 letters were received. There's been quite a bit of chatter on the internet about likely legal challenges, and there are external market economic pressures with respect to waste-to-energy plants in general, tipping fees that might render this project a no-go, even if all these other things pan out. Number 2, why might this project dissolve? Well, there was questionable financial representations. As the gentleman testified, there is a likelihood there will be an impact on counties' balance sheets because it does currently contain a $1 buyout, which constitutes a bargain buyout provision under FASB or GASB, and therefore would constitute a capital lease. That means it must be treated as a liability on the balance sheet. So arguments to the effect that this will have no effect on the county's finances are not accurate. If it occurs up as a liability on the balance sheet of the county, it could affect the county's bond ratings or ability to float additional bonds. And I don't know that this is apparent to all citizens in either Carroll or Frederick County. And one of the reasons I'm doing this today, I think it's time to get all the facts out so that everybody makes an informed decision. So when this becomes apparent, resolve may weaken. Number 3.
Right. While we're there,
Yes, sir.
how does this help the project evolve? I think we've been talking for 2 years about questionable financial representations. I think we're pretty familiar with the fact that they do. You know, there's been a great deal of argument and discussion over what numbers are the right numbers and all that. But in what way does that, if the authority and Frederick County want to keep going, how does the project dissolve because of that?
Well,
because that's what you're suggesting here, is that these facts will help the project to dissolve.
I think the question is public perception. There have been arguments on both sides of this issue going on for 2 years. The jury is still out. And one person will argue that it's capital lease and will show up as a liability, and somebody else argues that it's not. And because of that, there has been no clear messages communicated to the public, and therefore the public does not know what to think. And by clarifying these issues to the best of our abilities and getting the correct information out, if this becomes accepted as a fact, then at that point in time it might result in additional pressures coming to bear to kill the project.
It's not a time for comment.
Just wait.
I was just going to answer your question.
All right, let's keep going. Number 3. Another reason why this project might melt down, taxpayer liability for bonds. Again, the word on the street for years was, well, the taxpayers are not liable for these bonds. Well, that's technically true, but pragmatically it's not true. And expectations are improperly set, in my judgment. The bond payments are built into something called the energy recovery fee. And if the authority is unable to pay because the projected financial assumptions are not fulfilled, the taxpayers will be on the hook to make the bond payments, and I will show that in a minute, that are part of the energy recovery fee. And I don't believe that the authority has sufficient assets and debt to guarantee the bonds on its own. So what that means is if the project becomes financially unviable at some point in its life, the taxpayers will have to make the payments. Now, how will that happen? Because the word is the counties aren't responsible for the bonds. Well, let's go to the next slide. It says right in the Energy Recovery Agreement dated July 29, 2009, on page 11, quote, "The county shall pay the energy recovery fee," unquote. Well, the question is, what is the energy recovery fee? Well, it defines it on page 11. It says the energy recovery fee is equal to DS, which is the debt service, plus the facility fee, plus the alternate disposal cost, plus the operating cost, plus the alternate cost, plus the variable costs, minus the revenues. So there it is. If the taxpayers
Must be right then.
are responsible for paying the energy recovery fee, and the energy recovery fee includes the debt service, which is the cost of servicing the bonds, if there is not enough revenue, then the taxpayers have to make the payments on the bonds. So while they're not directly legally responsible for the issuance of the bonds, they are effectively backstopping the bonds. And when the taxpayers of Carroll County and Frederick County both realize that they are backstopping these bonds, well, the difference between backstopping bonds and being legally liable is really a distinction without much difference. Either way, if the project can't support itself, the taxpayers are making the bond payments. And this applies to Frederick County's proportion of the energy recovery fee, and this applies to Carroll County's proportion. This is a $600 million project. That means Frederick County taxpayers will have to backstop $360 million worth of debt, and we will have to backstop $240 million worth of debt. And I want this out there because I want to make it very clear, this is not a theory, this is not a belief, this is a fact. And this formula is right in the Energy Recovery Agreement on page 11. And it was disclosed thanks to Bruce Holstein. Thank you, Bruce. Okay, next slide. Number 4, possible inability to sell excess capacity. I believe that the market assumptions made from the very beginning of this project, as I think all of my fellow commissioners believe, were overly optimistic market assumptions. And the fact is this plant must operate at 100% of net capacity or 90+% of gross capacity to even have a chance of solvency. And a failure to sell excess capacity will threaten the project. Well, here we are 3 years into this project. To the best of my knowledge, there were no agreements in place, not even preliminary agreements that I'm aware of, to sell excess capacity. And there are reasons for that I'll get into. Number 5, improper trade-off comparisons. The Carroll comparison of the waste energy to hauling had ridiculously inflated hauling costs, there's a typo here, as did Frederick's. And I still remember the numbers from 3 years ago. We were paying $5 million a year, and the contract predicted that by 2015 it would be $11.6 million a year, $12.6 million a year. Well, here we are, we're only a year and a half away, and we're still at $5 million a year. So in doing the comparisons to justify incineration versus hauling, the hauling costs were inflated in Carroll and Frederick by more than 100%. More than 100%. And when that is corrected within the cost-benefit analysis to compare the respective costs of the two, hauling becomes cheaper than waste-to-energy. The assumptions that were made were overly optimistic then, and they're proving to be even more overly optimistic than we thought they were 3 years ago, because none of the predictions have come true that said that hauling would go up to $12.6 million a year. We're still at $5 million a year. 120% inflation of the alternate. Well, if I inflate the cost of an alternate option to 120%, you can bet the thing I want is going to be justified, but it's not a valid justification. Garbage in, garbage out is what we have with this justification. No pun intended. And it's not clear to me, maybe back up 1 second, it's not clear to me that there are any costs allocated to reflect the value of filling up our respective landfills with ash. Now, it's confusing in the contract, but every time we put something in our landfill, we're consuming it, which means we have to be writing it down. Well, a lot of ash is going to be going into our landfills. Next slide. Higher tipping. Why can't we sell at excess capacity? Well, higher tipping fees than current market rates. Again, the projections use the garbage in, garbage out scenario with projections. They predict the tipping fees will go to $200 a ton within 10 years or so. Here we are, 3 or 4 years after that contract was written, and the current market rate for tipping is still in the low to mid 50s. Low to mid 50s. And I've got some vendors I think are going to sign contracts with us to tip in the 40s. Well, how are you going to sell excess capacity as required in the contract at a cost of 20 to 30% higher than market? Because the way the contract is structured right now, assuming they sell 100% of their available capacity, they're going to have to charge a tipping fee 20 to 30% higher than market rates. Well, who in the heck's going to sign up for that? Why would I pay 20 or 30, another 10 or $20 a ton when I can go to the open market right now and tip for less? So my prediction is they're not going to sell that excess capacity, because once the numbers become apparent, the appetite for the dessert disappears. And if the waste energy plants, if they can't sell that capacity and they have to operate at less than 100% of their net capacity, because they can't fill it up, they can't feed it, then one of two things must happen. Either the tipping fees must go up even further, or they will have to implement a service benefit fee, which is just a fancy name for a tax to subsidize its operation. Now, I'm telling everybody this because I just want the facts out there. I'm not a pro-incinerator guy. I'm not an anti-incinerator guy. This has nothing to do with that. This has to do with financial realities, and I want the financial realities out on the streets so all the citizens of Carroll County, all the citizens of Frederick County make fully informed decisions, and at least they know what they're getting into if they continue to move forward. Next slide. Any other reasons to wait? Well, yes, invoices. Although we're capped at $3 million liability, I don't think any money should be dispersed without an audit of all the invoices since 2009. We need to ensure all fees are appropriate. We need to ensure there's no double billing. We need to make sure there was nothing paid that was inappropriate. Next slide. Now, this is where Commissioner Howard and I might disagree, but our disagreements are minor. Will giving a definite deadline motivate Frederick or the Northeast Waste Management Disposal to find a new partner? Well, I would say we have the same issue here we have with naming a pull-out deadline for the Middle East. Once you give your enemy, or the other side, a notice to when you're going to pull out, it gives them an incentive to sit in abeyance and do nothing, and one day after you leave, they come after you. Well, I suggest that if we name a definite date, even if they know of another partner, they're not going to execute contracts that become effective until one day after our stated deadline. Why? Well, because by waiting one day after our deadline, they can take our $3 million and keep it, and that reduces their liabilities by $3 million. Hey, if I can defer going to contract with John Doe and pick up $3 million from my former customer by waiting a couple months, I'll take the $3 million. I'll just tell John Doe, hey, John, wait till October 1st. Then we'll do it. We'll have the $3 million. I'll share the benefits of the $3 million we pick up from Carroll. I think it actually would decrease the probability that someone would sign up early because there's now an incentive to wait until after our stated deadline. Next slide. Will waiting increase our contract liabilities? Well, minimally. It could go up a couple $100,000. Next slide. What happens if we do nothing? Well, Frederick already knows we have no appetite for the project. They've not been able to sign another partner. If it was too good to be true, I assure you someone would have found it already. I tell investors, if you've got a great real estate project, you don't have to go out searching for money. The money will find you. The reason the money's not finding Frederick is because when they look under the hood of this project, the shiny exterior wears off.
But that's not the only reason, and part of it is permits, and that's a good reason.
Right.
There are people that maybe the numbers do work for them, but they want a permitted project, which
Right.
makes sense.
Now, to keep it alive, Frederick could downsize it by half. If so, we might be able to walk away and save $3 million. There are other concessions we might be able to make to Frederick and the authority to get them to let us go without paying the $3 million. There's no incentive for them to do that once we state that we're definitely going to leave by a deadline. What would you do if you were them? If I say I'm going to leave on September 30th, well, heck, I'll wait till September 30th and take you $3 million, Rich. Why wait? Now, there's another option too. I've been approached by several waste companies that said that in exchange for our business, they'd be willing to make concessions to us to help pay to get us out. Well, once we state that we're leaving on a date definite, there's no incentive for a third-party contractor to offer to buy us out to get our business. Next slide. So our perspective, and I think I speak for most of the board here, the project was, based on the data that I've seen, the project was oversold. In reality, the costs are higher than perceived, the liabilities are much greater than perceived, the trade-off alternatives are much more attractive than presented because of inflated costs for the trade-offs that didn't turn out to be correct. The pricing per ton is less competitive and the benefits were oversold. Next slide. Bottom line, the Board of Commissioners opposed this project 3 years ago, and I know the majority of us oppose it now because it remains financially unattractive to us. Now, we have accomplished something in 3 years. What did we accomplish? We have demonstrated to the public and to ourselves that our predictions that these assumptions in this incinerator model were wrong, that we would not see $12 million wrong. Our assumptions were proven correct. The authorities' assumptions were proven wrong. That's what 3 years has proven to us. And bottom line, leaving now or setting a specific deadline just to put the issue to bed at a cost of $3 million to taxpayers, I believe is not wise at this point in time. It has too many unintended negative consequences. Last slide, I believe. Recommendation, I think that Commissioner Howard and I should work together to open dialogue with Frederick and the authority as a team to try to negotiate our way out of this thing. Or I think we should do nothing and continue to wait and see if it dissolves on its own now that we're getting additional facts out in the marketplace so that the public is fully informed. And I certainly would not support paying the $3 million unless we were in a vice with no other way out. And if that means we wait till the last day of our office to pull the plug on this, then I'm prepared to do that, if necessary, to avoid incurring this $3 million cost unnecessarily. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right.